Hey, welcome back to the Old Gravy podcast. I hope you were able to catch my last podcast talking about the civil rights attorney, Benjamin Crump, and a very interesting case back in 2012 with Trayvon Martin. But Benjamin Crump, I'm going to continue on with him with this podcast because he's also involved with the George Floyd case from May of 2020. And it's interesting, the George Floyd case. And what I talk about in the Floyd case, once again, I'm going to bring it up to what's going on. This is, which happened in 2020. I'm going to bring you up to 2024. So I will bring you up to that. But anyway, the Floyd family is represented by Benjamin Crump. And as you learned from the last podcast, that the Trayvon Martin case was his debutante ball. That was his first case. That's where he started building his brand. But once again, I like to study this guy because he's a major player, not in legal circles, but in what's going on in the cultural, social circles of America and the fight between the right and the left. And Benjamin Crump seems to be a big player for the left. So what's there to say about the George Floyd case? Well, I watched a documentary called The Fall of Minneapolis. Now, obviously, this is, if you looked on Google, they're going to say this is right-wing analysis. But you know what? Once again, when you read, you see one narrative that comes out of the major media or what they call the mainstream media. I always like to take another look like I did with the Trayvon Martin case. There is a documentary called The Fall of Minneapolis, and the subtitle is They're Lying, the Media, the Left, and the Death of George Floyd. And I watched it, and it was made by a news reporter who is a news reporter in Minneapolis, and her husband was a high-ranking police officer in the Minneapolis Police Department. And I'm going to go with this. I call it, I don't like conspiracy theories. That's why I call it the old gravy collusion theory. I'm going to give you what I think the collusion is on the George Floyd incident. I think national Democrats and local Minneapolis Democrats and state Democrats, I think they colluded allowing to Minneapolis to burn. I think the fact that it spread to other urban areas, I think it kind of, they thought this could happen. They didn't want to really do anything to stop it. And you got to think of the time. This is May of 2020, and it's an election year. And COVID is in full force. And the mainstream media is like, COVID is Trump's fault. And now with the George Floyd death at the hands of police officers, now this is also Trump's fault. And cities burning and riots. Not only did he cause the pandemic, even though that's ridiculous, but it was, that's what they said. Trump didn't set up the right government thing that would have stopped it from coming in. Trump's a racist because he's blaming it on China. We're not going to go down that road, but this is the attitude this is the attitude of that time in 2020, and it's an election year. And so with the country falling apart with race riots, people are going to be like, yeah, this Trump, he's got to go. And my collusion theory is, I'm thinking this was they let this happen. And they knew it would be bad for Trump if cities started burning over the George Floyd incident. And if you watch the Fall of Minneapolis, they literally let this city burn to the ground without doing anything. And I'll kind of give you a little more insight to that in a minute. But let me give you what the narrative was. So George Floyd dies at 46. He's an African-American man. This is their narrative with no health issue, who was a victim of police brutality. Floyd was a guy kind of trying to get his life back on track. I think that was kind of that was the early narrative. That's the early message of George Floyd's death. The truth is, Floyd has serious drug addiction problems. He's got a long criminal history. He's been involved in robberies, theft, he's had gun crimes. He's had a life of crimes. He's had problems and addictions. Quite frankly, he's a sad soul. And I would say this about anyone. addiction sucks. It destroys your life, and anybody who's had to deal with it or people they know who had to deal with it, it's a terrible thing. Anyway, some of the interesting things I picked up from this video, and you guys can dispute it. You can go get your own evidence, but I'm just going to tell you what I saw in the Fall of Minneapolis, and some of the other things that I tried to, I tried to say, okay, if this happened, let's see what this person said about it. And so I'm going to just give you a quick summary of what I heard from them, what I've read. So the first important detail of the trial. The fire department was 8 blocks away, and they have a 3 to 5 minute response. That's their standard. But dispatch sent them to the wrong address. They ended up there 20 minutes later or more. And if you're in cardiac arrest, that time is critical. And quite frankly, it would have been less time for Officer Chauvin to have his knee on Floyd's neck. And I hope I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. On the cop body cams too, while Floyd is in the ambulance, a cop body cam picks up that the oxygen is not hooked up and pumping oxygen to Floyd. You can see it on the camera. That sounds like a big problem. Would that have had any effect on the charges? I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not a detective. But I'm playing one on the podcast. So now we get the attorney Benjamin Crump on the George Floyd case. And everyone's familiar with the case, so I'm not going through the details of the exact details of what happened that day. I'm just kind of giving you some information that you might not know about it. But the first thing, and it's all going to lead to the trial, how I believe that this trial was not proper. The way they set this trial up, it was you were going to get the result you wanted no matter what. So what kind of justice was served? I don't know if it would have been served if the trial had been set up in a more justice type of atmosphere, attitude, setting across the board. So anyway, once again, Benjamin Crump, he's the superstar now. He's the he's the attorney for the George Floyd family. They get a $27 million settlement with Minneapolis before the criminal trial. That's the largest settlement in U.S. history in a civil rights wrongful death. Now, usually, and I haven't gone back in every case record in the world for a case like this where the city settled civilly with the family, the victim's family, before they had a criminal trial. And what happens when you do something like that is you're contaminating the jury pool. You're contaminating everything in that area by saying, we screwed up so bad, or our employees, that we're paying you $27 million, but they haven't even gone to court yet. So if you're a jury from that pool, you're going to say to yourself, wow, they got $27 million. How could I possibly find these police officers innocent? So that's usually not the way it's done. But let me tell you, Benjamin Crump, this guy's a superstar. He got it done. He got the $27 million. Another thing is the city is burnt to the ground, 1,000 buildings, and they destroyed, I think, 1,500 businesses, primarily minority businesses. And I kind of feel like, why would the powerful people in Minneapolis or in Washington, D.C. allow, and even though this is under the Trump administration, I don't think Trump would go anywhere near it. The country would have went nuts, or his enemies, the political party, the Democrats who were against him. There was no way he was going in there. But why would the local politicians, state politicians, and who were they talking to at the federal level of the Democratic Party, that no one was demanding Trump go in there and stop this? But the truth is they could have stopped themselves. And I'm going to get into that. With the police officers, there was no plan. They were told to stand down. They were given no equipment to go fight the rioters. In the end, they actually had to run from the police precinct near where George Floyd was killed. They actually ran for their lives. They were waiting for orders on how to protect the precinct. Let me tell you, giving up a police precinct is a message that if you will abandon a police precinct, there is no law and order. I don't know of any other time where the cops literally ran away from a police precinct. But it did in Minneapolis. And that doesn't just happen. I don't believe that doesn't happen unless the powerful people want that to happen. And when you hear on this documentary, cops that were calling in asking, what is our plan? What are we to do? What is our strategy? And they had all pre-plans for riots. They all trained for stuff like this. But there was no plans and there was no orders. It was more like, just protect yourself. And here are some other things about the people who got involved and why this became such a kind of dumpster fire. The funeral of Floyd, the minister actually, you can hear it on video, he gives a shout out to the gangs of Minneapolis. You can hear it. It's like, what the heck is this guy doing? The FBI shows up in Minneapolis 12 hours after Floyd's death. 12 hours. There's a local office of the FBI out in the Midwest. There could be one in Minneapolis. But the FBI from D.C., and I know it's starting to sound conspiratorial, but they're there in 12 hours. That's not common. That's not common. And actually, let me play this tape of Nancy Pelosi. Listen to what she says.
So again, thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice.
Now, you hear that. Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice. That's a weird, first of all, that's an awful thing to say. George Floyd had no intention of sacrificing his life for justice. And it kind of says, like, what happened to you allowed us to do all these other things to make it worse because we have an election coming up with Joe Biden in the next 4 or 5 months. So it's kind of like, good job, you're dead, but good job. It's just a very weird, I'm not a psychologist, but someone should diagnose that. Judge Cahill, who was on the case of the Floyd case, longtime Democrat, was a Senator Klobuchar, who was a Democrat who ran for president. He was a minion of hers. Now, another guy, this Mayor Frey, you got to listen to the clips of this guy talking. This guy's pretty kooky. You know what? He went to William and Mary, and I'm not surprised. That's where Jen Psaki, spokesperson for Biden. That's where Comey was from. Peyton Oswalt, another hardcore entertainer from the King of Queens. William and Mary, and like a lot of Ivy League schools, they have all this endowment money. They're kind of like hedge funds that kind of run indoctrination camps. But it's funny how I'm associating William and Mary now. I'm starting connecting all these people involved in really like hardcore Democratic politics. Keith Ellison was involved. He was the attorney general to kind of bring all these charges with the local DAs. He's a former Democratic congressman. He has a lot of issues. I mean, I could do another Keith Ellison show. Maxine Waters, she showed up. She's 85. She was all out there, yelling, what happened there. Al Sharpton showed up. All these characters showed up. Trump did make a statement, and he said they should seek justice for Floyd, and the people who burned down the city were thugs. And he's spot on. That's what happens when you burn down a city. Thugs come out to burn down people. Honest, innocent people they might take stuff because it's out there and this is what people are doing today, but burning down buildings and robbing, that's thuggery. You could call it whatever you want, criminal behavior. But when he said it, what I found interesting, the media and the Democrats lost their minds. Like in the sense that burning down cities were fine. I'll tell you why it's not fine. There's a great organization called Project Hood out in Chicago. And when these riots moved from Minneapolis and they moved over into Chicago, into Baltimore, into Philadelphia, when they spread like wildfire, I found this interesting. The guy that runs Project Hood in Chicago, the basis of the focus of their organization is to kind of help young people don't go down the wrong path. And they have all type of clinics and educational things and events to keep kids in Chicago, kids in bad neighborhoods, to keep them away from going to live that criminal life. That's what their major plan is. And what he said what happened with the George Floyd riots is when you start losing the CVSs and you start losing the grocery stores and they all get burned down, your whole plan for your nonprofit, like what your goal is to help these kids, it all shifted. It all went to older minority people now who couldn't get they couldn't get their drugs from CVS because it was burned out. They couldn't go to the local market they went because that was put on fire. It really creates havoc within communities that have no room for any more troubling issues. It's the same thing what we're seeing with the illegal immigration. It hits hardest in the poorest communities that are already struggling for resources. So why would they lose? It's their one party was kind of like, just let the whole Minneapolis thing burn. And then that spread like wildfire. Another thing I found weird is the jury wasn't sequestered. The city says it was partially sequestered. Why weren't they fully sequestered? Because what was going on there around that courthouse and a burnt out city, and you're trying to pick a jury pool, you have barbed wire around the courthouse with the National Guard surrounding the courthouse. So when you're a jury member and you walk into the courthouse and you see you're being protected from the National Guard, there's barbed wire everywhere, and there's thousands of people chanting, "Say his name, George Floyd." Yeah, wouldn't you think that you might need a change of venue? And an interesting question asked to the jury, which is documented, did they support Black Lives Matter? 100% said, yeah, they were supporters of Black Lives Matter. Now, anyone who's reasonable would say that's going to be, anyone is a 100% support of Black Lives Matter is going to have some bias against cops. That's how you rule out juries, because you don't want bias. You want people to get in there and have a judicial mind and make good decisions to bring justice. But the way this was lined up, unbelievable. I just think the way the trial was set up, it needed to be moved, obviously. And the trial really was fueled by a mob mentality, and it was spurred on by Democrats' elites. You can hear some of the quotes, right after, without looking into everything about the case. It was a senseless murder. Listen, it was ugly. The 8 minutes was ugly, but there's like 40 more minutes of videotape that you see from the buildings that were outside where George Floyd was held down. There you have outside video, you have the cop cams, you can hear the cops talking about it. There's just so much more information that you never got to see. So I will say the Fall of Minneapolis, is it 100% true? I don't know. But let me tell you, there's some really good information where you can look at it with your own eyes, because there is so much more video, not the 9-minute or 11-minute video from a kid in the street holding a phone, because I think that's what most of the video that Americans saw was from that handheld video. Another thing, the coroner, not the coroner on the case from Minneapolis, but Baden, I think his name, or Baden, he's kind of like the famous coroner. When he went on the news, he said Floyd was a healthy young man. Supposedly he did an autopsy, but I heard he only read the reports. He didn't actually look at the body. I don't know if that's true or not, but the fact that he said, even by reading the reports, Floyd wasn't a healthy young man at 46, but that's what Baden said. It's a little bit disturbing. Another big part of the case was the chief of police. His name was Arredondo. He said that the maximum restraint technique, that is what the officer Chauvin was using on George Floyd. It's called MRT. And the chief police said, no, we don't use MRT here, but it happens to be in the training manual. And in the documentary, you can see it in the training manual with a picture. And then you have a bunch of cops who have testified in the video, in the documentary, and who would testify to anybody if they asked, where they taught MRT, maximum restraint technique, in the police academy. And they all said, yeah, they were all taught it. The fact that the judge didn't allow that into the case, I find very interesting. Because maybe not only the police who are now paying a prison term, maybe the city should have held a little bit more accountability for what happened. If they were teaching MRT and you didn't want them to teach MRT. But police have also made a ton of public statements. There was no reaction plan executed, none. They said there was no action plan. Basically, it was kind of lay low and hopefully you don't get hurt. And that was amazing that police departments would allow 1,500 businesses to be destroyed and 1,000 structures to go on fire. Maybe not 1,000. There were a few hundred, but with businesses all within those structures. We'll be right back after this. Here's another part of the case that I found interesting. There's a video of George Floyd being arrested prior to the incident where he lost his life. And in that encounter with the police officer comes upon his car. He's about to eat something like a crack cocaine. It looks like crack cocaine, like a little piece of crack cocaine. And he tries to swallow it. I think he's already swallowed something already. The cop actually grabs his hand, knocks it out, and he starts acting in a way, and it's on the cop cam, very similar to the day he would die in May with the 4 officers there. He kind of was doing the exact same thing. The good news there is the cop on site, just like the cops at the site when Floyd died, they called for an ambulance like within a minute. And you can see that on the cop cam, on the cop body cam. In both incidents, the cops moved quick to call the fire department. And as I told you before, the one going to when the day Floyd passed away, they took the wrong address. It wasn't given wrong. They took it down wrong and were 20 minutes to get there. In this incident, the ambulance showed up really quick. And they got him on oxygen and they got him to the hospital. And obviously, George Floyd survived that encounter I'm talking about. That was prior to when he lost his life that May. And I want to say this. This isn't about Trayvon or about George Floyd. It's kind of weird how these powerful people they write a narrative for for political, economical, cultural power, and they really don't care what happens, what the outcome of that is, and that's the two things that I've noticed in Trayvon and George Floyd. The fact that they allowed that city to burn is unbelievable. What that did to the people of Minneapolis, but it didn't affect the power players. And that's my bigger point. It didn't affect the power players. Here's another thing about the autopsy done by a Dr. Baker. And his findings said Floyd had a bad heart. He had high blood pressure. He had an enlarged heart. And he had fentanyl in his system, among other things, when he died. The autopsy also showed he had no bruising on his neck, which the coroner thought would be evident when Officer Chauvin was kneeling on him. And some people say it's not the neck, it's the shoulder blade, but I'm not getting into that. I'm just telling you what the coroner said. He also said he did not see anything from the pressure from the knee that would cut off the airway. He said that. He said he had done autopsies where people died from less fentanyl. And he said that so people have died from less fentanyl that had OD'd compared to what George had in his system. Floyd's arteries were significantly narrowed. He was 46, but, I have friends, tell me they go, the heart doctors and they talk about the narrowed arteries, but I don't know the degree and I'm not a heart doctor. He did have an enlarged heart. He was positive for COVID at the time. And this was during the lockdowns, and he was positive. And my thoughts are his breathing, because COVID in the early stage, it appeared to be a lot stronger than the COVID that we got, the different variants we got later, except for Delta. That one was pretty strong. But that first dose of COVID, where we locked down in March, and this is May, and he had COVID. He was positive for COVID. His opinion, this Baker, the coroner, was that Floyd's interaction with the police tipped Floyd over the edge. Even if he had a belly full of fentanyl and he had underlying health conditions, the coroner scientist said, well, it was the interaction that sent him. Man, I think that's a leap. I think that's a big leap, because it could be like if cops are chasing a guy high on cocaine or whatever, and he crashes the car, that's an interaction. And then they're following him and he crashes the car and kills himself. Would they be in jail for that today? I don't think so. Well, it depends what jurisdiction you're in, I guess. And Baker, based on some of the testimony from his coworkers, is that he did say there was enough fentanyl in Floyd's system to kill him. And at one point, someone testified for this, because I was able to read it in the Fall of Minneapolis. There's a document that someone, a coworker of Baker, had it could be this trial testimony that they video, and the prosecution will use it, but they got to give it to the defense. But one of the people testified that Baker said to a coworker, what are people going to do when the autopsy doesn't match the narrative that is being spewed? He doesn't say those exact words, but the autopsy is not going to match the narrative that this guy was killed because the police put so much pressure on the neck that they cut off his air and killed him. And that's an interesting piece of evidence. But then when you go back, he kind of covers himself, because he said it was the interaction with the police. Regardless if he had fentanyl that killed other people he'd seen in autopsy, and even though Floyd had more, and he had underlying conditions, I guess that's the way that written testimony about, people, what are people going to say when the autopsy doesn't match the narrative? I guess he figured a way out of that. The other thing, the MRT, the maximum restraint, in the training book of the Minneapolis Police Department, that image is in the training manual, but the judge didn't let that into the case. They didn't let the jury hear that. I find that unbelievable. I wouldn't understand why that wouldn't be in there. So anyway, I'm not running a new trial for the 4 police officers that are in prison right now. But I would say whatever trial they had there, I don't think it was done fairly. And if I would say it probably it must be redone, but it won't be redone. But there's just too much information that doesn't make any sense. But you know what? Watch the video yourself, the documentary, the Fall of Minneapolis, and see what you see, because it's not just 8 or 9 minutes. You get to see a lot more video and a lot more commentary, and you get to meet all the characters that play a role that actually incite the riots too. That's a really good part of it, is watching what some of our leadership was saying at the time, actually throwing fuel on the fire. But, when we talk about our institutions and the judicial system, you're starting to see everything starting to rot. I mean, the intelligence community. The FBI had proven a year before that Hunter's laptop was not Russian interference. And those guys, those 51 top guys, they all got FBI friends. They all know what the real deal was. But but for political reasons, they signed that letter. Matter of fact, the letter was crafted by Biden's Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. I don't know if many people know that, but he's the one that wrote the letter. And I don't even think anyone in Washington tries to hide that. Or even, our National Institute of Health with Fauci trying to say like, oh, no, it didn't come from a lab. Everyone's got to wear masks. Vaccinating young people because we all needed to do that. And then the Wuhan lab had nothing to do with it, but that's where the virus came out of Wuhan, and there's a military lab there. And that's where they work on gain of function viruses. But we're all supposed to believe that's not true. But it's not Fauci. It's what is he doing to our institution, the National Institute of Health? the people that we're going to rely on when something really comes in and it's like Ebola or something. No one's going to believe it anymore. So this deterioration of trust in our institutions are crazy. The FBI today, sometimes you look at it, it looks like a Democratic police force. The way they go in with their SWAT teams and then, but I mean, these are all individual shows. We could do a show on the FBI, but then you might lose Old Gravy because they'll put them in federal prison. Even look at the institution, the Border Patrol and ICE. They are institutions. They used to protect our border and take bad people who were committing crimes in the country who weren't here legally. They would take them and toss them out. That is an institution. And now they've become processing clerks. And our Department of Homeland Security, who's supposed to be watching all our asses, watching out for our kids, the head of it, Mayorkas, the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, the top, I guess you could call him the top cop in the world. Maybe he's even over the FBI. And he's saying the border is operationally secure. And we're seeing what's happening. People by the millions have entered in the country, never mind all the crime that we're starting to hear about. And you won't hear about most of it, but there are some big stories that are coming out, and everyone knew this was going to happen. But you think it's Mayorkas is the problem? No, he is destroying the Department of Homeland Security. That's an institution that all Americans have to rely on. Women's sports, another institution. Trans women are now allowed. Now, women's sports is an institution, and the most powerful people in the world. You can go into a corporate boardroom. You could go into Congress. They will tell you that the Penn swimmer, Leah Thomas, is not only a woman, not a trans woman. I understand. Listen, trans women are trans women. That's fine. You live your life any way you want. I got that, and don't mistreat anybody. Don't discriminate. Whatever. But they will tell you. These powerful, influential people, which will destroy women's sport as an institution, that not only, and I'm going to go back to Leah Thomas, I don't mean to pick on her, but, she's out there, kind of pushing the cause. And they will not only say Leah Thomas in a women's swim outfit, who's biologically a male, will tell you that she is not, and I've heard them say this, she is not only a woman, but she is a woman advancing women's rights. Now, that's going to destroy women's sports. I mean, that even takes it to another place that she's advancing women's rights. I can't even make sense of that. And if anyone can, please, you know what you do? If you can make sense of it, email me at oldgravypodcast@gmail.com because I'd love to hear about it. Here's another institution, and we talked in the last two podcasts, I've done the judicial system. The Trump charges by Letitia James. She was running for the state attorney general. While she's running, she says, I'm going to get Trump convicted. She doesn't say what for. It's kind of like it's an open thing. Don't worry. Elect me, and I will find something to get him prosecuted on. That's destroying New York State, the whole judicial system in New York State, and has an effect on the country. You don't do that. Stalin used to say, bring me the man and I'll show you the crime. And basically, that's what Letitia James said. Just get me elected, and I'm gonna find a crime, and I'm gonna pin it on Trump, and I'm gonna get him. And then you have another judicial system problem ruining New York City by not prosecuting criminals. Is this DA Bragg? He is now going to prosecute Trump on the porn star Stormy Daniels' hush money. In crime-ridden New York, this isn't a case for DA Bragg. It's a case for no one, quite frankly. And Bragg is using up resources to get Trump with the Stormy Daniels case. He's trying to tie it into a federal campaign violation. What's his business with all the crime in New York City today? He's worrying about federal campaign violations? Yeah. That's another institution. The DA office in New York City is being destroyed by this guy. So, we got to go to Fannie Willis in Atlanta. A local DA is trying a RICO case on presidential election fraud. That's unheard of. That is so out of their wheelhouse. And that's what she's doing. Now we're finding out she hired her boyfriend, Nathan Wade, who's a traffic court judge and a family court lawyer. That's who she hires to prosecute this very expensive election fraud. And he's a traffic court judge and a family court lawyer. And then we find out she hires him and it's her boyfriend and they're going on expensive vacations. He's billing the state a ton of money and Fannie the DA, Fannie Willis, is signing off on all the expenses. This is beyond, this is comedy. It's like we're no longer a serious country. We're no longer a serious country. And I want to say this because my last two profiles or two podcasts, and I profiled Trayvon Martin and the Floyd case, have nothing to do with the rot in our judicial system. Those two people, that young man and that man who died, who had a serious drug addiction, they have nothing to do with this. But our institutions and the people that are running these institutions and colluding with these institutions for political power are really ruining the country. And I know ruining is a big word, but I think we're at the point where we got to slow down the ruining at some point. So I'll leave you with that. I hope you come back to join me. And if you have any comments on today's show, you just email me at oldgravypodcast@gmail.com. It was great to have you. Talk to you later.